Never before has humanity been so comfortable. We live in climate-controlled homes, surrounded by devices that answer our questions, clean our floors, and even remind us to drink water. Food arrives at our doors with the swipe of a finger. Medicine extends our lifespans. Education is more accessible than ever. On paper, this is the closest thing to paradise we've ever known. And yet, despite all this progress, one of the oldest and most fundamental parts of human life is quietly collapsing: the bond between men and women. Walk into almost any major city, and you'll find apartments filled with accomplished, independent women, scrolling endlessly through dating apps, wondering why none of the men feel worth their time. Across the street, you'll find men living self-sufficient bachelor lifestyles, stocked with entertainment systems, delivery apps, and services that provide everything once expected from a partner. Both sexes are thriving in independence, and both are quietly starving for connection. The irony is staggering. Thousands of years of human history were shaped by necessity. Men and women needed each other to survive, for protection, for resources, for the sheer ability to carry forward the next generation. Cooperation wasn't optional. It was life or death, and yet here we are, standing at the peak of prosperity, watching those survival bonds disintegrate. This is what I call the necessity extinction event. It's not an asteroid, it's not climate collapse, and it's not war. It's prosperity itself. Progress so complete that it has erased the reasons we once had to depend on one another. And without necessity, attraction and cooperation are eroding. Think about it. A man once proved his worth by providing security, resources, and strength. A woman once proved hers by managing the domestic sphere, raising children, and ensuring survival in ways men couldn't. These weren't stereotypes. They were survival strategies. Today, both roles have been outsourced, automated, or made irrelevant by technology, institutions, and money. So here's the chilling question. If survival no longer requires partnership, then what actually holds relationships together in modern life? For the first time in human history, relationships have become optional, and that shift has unleashed an avalanche of new psychological problems: rising expectations, declining tolerance for compromise, addiction to options, and an entire ecosystem of digital substitutes that mimic intimacy, while making real intimacy harder to sustain. It's no coincidence that marriage rates are plummeting. Birth rates are collapsing in every developed nation. Loneliness has been declared a public health crisis. Mental health struggles are at record highs. These aren't random statistics. They're symptoms of the same root disease. Prosperity has quietly poisoned partnership. And here's the paradox. Everything we thought would make love easier, wealth, independence, abundance, freedom, has instead made it harder. Relationships aren't dying because people don't want them. They're dying because modern conditions have made them almost impossible to maintain. But how did we get here? What mechanisms are actually at play? Why do wealthy societies see marriages dissolve faster, children arrive later, and satisfaction shrink even while opportunities expand? The answer lies in a series of hidden dynamics, invisible forces quietly reshaping love, desire, and human connection. They sound complicated, but once you see them, you'll never look at modern dating the same way again. There's the prosperity paradox matrix, which explains why comfort erodes motivation. There's the desire escalation trap, where infinite options lead to impossible standards. There's the digital delusion ecosystem, where virtual substitutes hijack our instincts. And there's the independence ideology revolution, where being alone is glorified and needing someone is treated like weakness. Stacked together, these forces form a perfect storm, a cultural, psychological, and biological mismatch that's dismantling relationships at their foundation. And here's the part no one wants to say out loud. This isn't just about dating apps, gender roles, or hookup culture. This is about survival itself, because if men and women lose the ability to form stable partnerships, entire societies collapse. Cultures with functioning family systems will thrive. Cultures that don't will fade. It's not a question of romance, it's a question of civilization. So before you swipe left one more time, before you dismiss love as outdated, ask yourself this: are we truly evolving beyond the need for each other? Or are we sleepwalking into extinction? Not of humanity, but of connection itself. Stay with me, because in the next section, I'm going to break down the first stage of this collapse, the necessity extinction event. And once you understand it, everything about modern dating will suddenly make sense. For most of human history, survival wasn't a solo project. It was a team sport. Men and women depended on one another not because they wanted to, but because they had to. The brutal conditions of life left no other choice. If a man wanted children, he needed a woman. If a woman wanted protection, she needed a man. Together they formed partnerships not built on luxury, but on necessity. This foundation carried humanity through thousands of years. Every culture, no matter how different, carried the same truth. Survival was a cooperative contract between the sexes. He hunted, she nurtured. He defended, she organized. He built, she preserved. These weren't stereotypes designed to trap people. They were survival systems designed to keep us alive. But then came progress, technology, institutions, economic independence. Bit by bit, the old contracts dissolved, and as they disappeared, so did the glue that held relationships together. What we're living through right now is the final stage of that unraveling. I call it the necessity extinction event, the moment when men and women no longer need each other to survive. Look around and you'll see it everywhere. A woman with 3 degrees and a 6-figure salary doesn't need a man to pay her rent, buy her food, or give her children security. Banks, insurance companies, and governments provide that protection now. She can walk into any clinic and become a mother without ever speaking to a man. The survival link is gone. Meanwhile, a man living in his bachelor pad doesn't need a woman to cook, clean, or care for his home. He has apps, delivery services, and subscription boxes that take care of everything. A cleaning service scrubs his bathroom. A food app delivers his dinner. A virtual assistant organizes his schedule. The survival link is gone for him too. And that changes everything. Because for the first time in history, relationships are no longer driven by necessity. They're driven only by desire. And desire is fickle. Desire changes with mood, with convenience, with 1,000 tiny preferences that survival used to override. Think about it. 100 years ago, a farmer's wife might not have found him charming, but she needed him. He couldn't have survived without her either. That necessity forged bonds, even when attraction faded or conflict erupted. Today, those bonds don't exist. If the spark fades, people leave. Why? Because they can. This is the survival redundancy revolution. A revolution where both sexes have become individually self-sufficient. Every survival skill, every protection mechanism, every service once provided by a partner can now be purchased, automated, or outsourced. That redundancy destroys the motivation for cooperation. And once cooperation collapses, relationships face a new kind of fragility. I call it the cooperation collapse dynamic. The reality that without necessity, people only stay together if they want to. That sounds romantic, but it's actually dangerous because desire alone is rarely strong enough to sustain long-term partnership. Modern society also triggered what I call the security obsolescence process. Once upon a time, marriage provided stability, economic, social, and physical. Today, that role has been outsourced. Governments provide pensions, police enforce safety, insurance covers disasters. Security, once a reason to marry, has become obsolete. And so, we face an uncomfortable truth. The bedrock of human connection has eroded under our feet. Relationships that once served as lifeboats in stormy seas are now luxury yachts on calm waters. Nice to have, but not necessary. And when something becomes unnecessary, people approach it with less urgency, less effort, and less willingness to sacrifice. This is why modern dating feels so different. It's not that people have suddenly become selfish or lazy. It's that the very conditions that made partnership essential no longer exist when survival is guaranteed by society, technology, and money. Partnership loses its urgency. But here's the catch. While necessity has disappeared, human psychology hasn't caught up. Our brains are still wired for the old system, for cooperation, interdependence, and shared struggle. That mismatch creates the tension we're seeing today. People crave connection, but they don't need it. And when desire is the only driver, relationships become unstable, fragile, and disposable. The necessity extinction event is the silent earthquake underneath modern dating. It doesn't scream. It doesn't make headlines, but it shakes everything. It explains why traditional advice fails, why marriages collapse faster, and why people feel so frustrated in the search for love. We're trying to play a game whose rules have changed, but no one told us. And this is only the beginning, because once necessity disappears, something even more insidious takes its place: the prosperity paradox. A system where abundance doesn't bring happiness or connection, but instead slowly erodes them. Stay with me, because in the next section, we'll uncover the prosperity paradox matrix and why every step toward greater wealth and comfort has secretly pushed love further out of reach. Imagine waking up in a world where everything you need is within arm's reach. Your fridge is stocked, your bills are paid automatically, your streaming service provides endless entertainment, and your phone gives you instant access to companionship, validation, and distraction. It sounds perfect. It sounds like freedom. But in relationships, this level of comfort comes with a hidden cost, one that most people never notice until it's too late. That cost is what I call the prosperity paradox matrix, a psychological trap where wealth and abundance, instead of making relationships easier, quietly dismantle the desire to maintain them. In other words, the more prosperous you become, the less motivated you are to form and sustain partnerships. That's how it works. The self-sufficiency escalation effect. Every step up the prosperity ladder reduces dependence on others. A pay raise means you no longer need to split rent with a partner. A bigger social circle means you don't need one person to fulfill your emotional needs. A gym membership replaces the accountability once provided by a spouse, encouraging healthy routines. Step by step, prosperity builds a fortress around the individual. Inside that fortress, relationships feel less like lifelines and more like optional accessories. This effect makes relationships feel like luxury goods, nice to have, but not essential. And when something is no longer essential, people approach it with a consumer mindset. If it's not perfect, they won't buy. The option inflation syndrome. Prosperity doesn't just reduce dependence, it multiplies alternatives. Food apps provide endless dinner companions. Streaming platforms provide infinite entertainment. Social media supplies admiration from strangers. Dating apps offer thousands of romantic candidates at the swipe of a finger. Each of these alternatives inflates expectations by showing us just how many options exist. In the past, your choices were limited by geography and community. You might have met 5 or 10 potential partners in your lifetime. Today, you can swipe through 500 in an hour, but abundance doesn't create satisfaction. It creates inflation. Standards rise. Tolerance falls. The pool grows wider but shallower. The comfort zone expansion process. Wealth also allows people to design living spaces that feel perfectly customized to their individual preferences. The music is just right. The furniture fits their exact taste. The thermostat is set to the degree. And once someone adapts to this personalized comfort zone, sharing that space with another human feels like an intrusion. Suddenly, compromise feels unbearable. Why adjust when you're used to perfection? Relationships require friction, two imperfect lives blending together. But prosperity trains people to avoid friction, to demand seamlessness. That demand makes partnerships feel less rewarding and more exhausting. The relationship cost amplification. Here's where the paradox becomes sharpest. In an abundant society, the costs of relationships feel bigger than ever. Sacrificing your comfort for a partner, compromising on decisions, adjusting to someone else's habits, all of it feels expensive when compared to the smooth efficiency of solo living. Prosperity inflates the price tag of love. It's not that relationships became harder, it's that comfort made us less willing to pay the price they've always required. The tolerance threshold degradation. Prosperity also lowers tolerance. Small conflicts, minor annoyances, and everyday compromises, the things couples used to endure because they had no choice, now feel intolerable. Why? Because when you can be perfectly comfortable alone, why bother enduring discomfort with someone else? This is why divorce rates spike in wealthier societies, even when those societies provide more opportunities for happiness. People simply won't tolerate imperfection when they don't have to. The prosperity trap in action. This matrix explains why wealthy nations consistently report declining birth rates, marriage rates, and relationship satisfaction. It's not that people hate love, it's that prosperity reshaped the environment that love depends on. When survival is guaranteed, the urgency of connection evaporates. When alternatives are infinite, satisfaction dwindles. When comfort is abundant, compromise feels unbearable. That is the paradox. Prosperity removes the need for relationships, but in doing so, it removes the ability to sustain them. The very progress that was meant to enrich human life has quietly corroded the foundation of human connection. And yet, the paradox is only one layer of the problem. Because prosperity doesn't just inflate comfort zones and diminish tolerance, it also escalates desire itself. With no limits, people begin chasing ideals that don't exist, setting standards that no partner could ever meet. This is the next stage in the collapse, what I call the desire escalation trap, a psychological spiral where expectations rise, compromise vanishes, and fantasy partners replace real ones. Stay with me, because in the next section, we'll explore how this trap works and why it's leaving an entire generation stuck in endless cycles of searching, swiping, and rejecting. If prosperity made relationships feel optional, the next stage made them feel impossible. This is the desire escalation trap, a psychological spiral where expectations rise faster than reality can keep up, and where compromise feels like failure. It's the trap that convinces people to keep searching endlessly, always swiping for someone better, always waiting for the perfect partner who never arrives. The expectation inflation cycle. Here's how it begins. Each year of single life raises the bar for what a partner must provide. The longer someone lives independently, the more comfortable they become in their routines, their preferences, and their freedom. So the partner they eventually accept must not only match what they want in a relationship, but also surpass the comfort of being single. In the past, people accepted good enough partners because good enough was all they had. Today, good enough feels like settling, and settling has been demonized as weakness. That cycle inflates expectations year after year until no one feels adequate. The fantasy partner syndrome. Technology turbocharges this process. With infinite profiles to scroll through, people unconsciously build mental collages of ideal partners. One profile shows someone with perfect looks. Another shows someone with perfect humor. Another highlights career success. Another emotional sensitivity. The brain stitches them together into a fantasy figure that no real human could ever replicate. And once that fantasy partner exists in the mind, every real person feels like a disappointment. The gap between reality and imagination becomes impossible to bridge. The opportunity cost obsession. Modern prosperity also injects economics into romance. Every potential partner is evaluated like an investment. Is this relationship the best use of my time, my energy, my youth? What if I commit to someone now and miss out on someone better tomorrow? This obsession with opportunity cost keeps people trapped in endless hesitation. Instead of saying yes to a good partner, they keep waiting for a perfect one. And in the waiting, they miss out on the very satisfaction they're searching for. The settlement phobia pattern. Here's where the trap becomes a prison. Prosperity has taught people that they deserve the best of everything. The best career, the best apartment, the best vacation. Naturally, they extend that logic to relationships. Any compromise feels like self-betrayal. If a partner doesn't check every box, people panic, terrified they'll regret settling. But the truth is, no partner checks every box. Relationships are built on trade-offs. Yet prosperity has erased our tolerance for trade-offs, creating a culture where fear of settling keeps people perpetually single. The infinite postponement protocol. The final piece of the trap is time. Because people are living longer and healthier lives, they believe they have unlimited time to find someone. I'll settle down later, they think. Later becomes 5 years, then 10, then 20. By the time they realize time wasn't unlimited, their standards have escalated so high that no partner could possibly meet them. This protocol tricks people into thinking they're making rational choices. In reality, they're stuck in endless postponement, chasing an illusion that grows further away the longer they chase it. The emotional cost of the trap. The desire escalation trap doesn't just block relationships, it damages the psyche. It turns dating into a constant comparison game. It turns partners into products on a shelf. It creates anxiety, insecurity, and exhaustion. People begin to question not only their partners, but themselves. And perhaps the cruelest irony is this: the more prosperity expands, the worse the trap becomes. The more options people have, the less satisfied they feel. The more standards they create, the fewer partners qualify. Abundance was supposed to give people freedom. Instead, it shackled them to impossible expectations. The link to modern dating frustrations. This is why so many people describe modern dating as exhausting, pointless, or broken. It's not that they don't want love. It's that they're caught in a trap where desire escalates beyond reality. But the story doesn't end here, because just as prosperity inflated desire, it also created a powerful illusion, the sense that digital substitutes could replace real intimacy. And that illusion has become one of the most destructive forces in modern relationships. Stay with me, because in the next section, we'll dive into the digital delusion ecosystem. A world where likes, swipes, and virtual connections mimic intimacy, but secretly corrode our ability to form it in real life. If the desire escalation trap makes people chase perfection, the digital delusion ecosystem convinces them they've already found it online. For the first time in history, humans can experience the feeling of connection, intimacy, and validation without ever needing to build it in reality. It's a simulation so convincing that many people no longer see the point of doing the real thing. The intimacy substitution infrastructure. Scroll through your phone, and you'll see it. Apps and platforms are designed to replace the messy, complicated, time-consuming work of real relationships with instant substitutes. Social media gives you endless attention. Streaming services provide companionship. Video games deliver teamwork and shared adventure. Dating apps supply endless flirtation, even if it never leads to a date. This is the intimacy substitution infrastructure. A system that feeds your psychological cravings without requiring vulnerability, compromise, or effort. It feels easier. It feels safer, but it's an illusion. The validation marketplace. In the past, if you wanted admiration, you had to earn it through real connection. You had to build trust, prove reliability, or demonstrate loyalty. Today, you can post a photo and receive dozens, hundreds, even thousands of affirmations within hours. Each like, comment, or fire emoji acts as a microdose of validation. This is the validation marketplace, where self-worth is measured in metrics, not in genuine bonds. The problem? Validation without intimacy is like sugar without nutrition. It feels good for a moment, but it never satisfies. Instead, it makes people hungrier, not for love, but for more likes. The fantasy relationship economy. This ecosystem also includes what I call the fantasy relationship economy. Through parasocial relationships, people experience the highs of intimacy without the lows. Fans feel emotionally connected to influencers, celebrities, and even fictional characters. They share inside jokes, feel seen, and believe they belong. But the relationship is one-sided. The intimacy exists only in their imagination. Fantasy relationships don't demand compromise. They don't argue. They don't disappoint. That's why they're addictive. But in their perfection, they sabotage real relationships, which will always be messier and more demanding. The effort avoidance pathway. Here's where the ecosystem becomes most destructive. It teaches people that they can satisfy their deepest desires without paying the price relationships require. Entertainment platforms give stimulation without interaction. Adult content gives sexual release without intimacy. Virtual spaces give companionship without compromise. This is the effort avoidance pathway, and once someone gets used to it, the real work of relationships feels unbearable. Why endure conflict, negotiation, or vulnerability when a device can give you the same feeling instantly? The reality comparison distortion. The ecosystem doesn't just substitute relationships, it actively sabotages them. Constant exposure to curated, edited, and perfected lives online creates reality comparison distortion. Suddenly, actual relationships feel disappointing. Your partner isn't as witty as that influencer. Your life together isn't as glamorous as the one you saw on Instagram. Real people can't compete with digital fantasies, and when comparison sets in, dissatisfaction follows. Relationships end not because they're broken, but because they can't measure up to illusions. Why the ecosystem feels safer. Part of the reason people fall into this ecosystem is psychological safety. Real intimacy requires risk. You can be rejected, hurt, or betrayed. But online, rejection stings less. Attention is abundant. Connection feels limitless. And when something goes wrong, you can simply scroll to the next distraction. This creates a generation trained to prefer simulations over reality. Why risk heartbreak when you can curate validation? Why struggle through conflict when you can mute, block, or swipe? The hidden cost. But here's the hidden cost. Substitutes never fulfill the deeper human need for real intimacy. They trick the brain into thinking it's satisfied while leaving the soul malnourished. That's why people can spend hours online, surrounded by digital attention, and still feel crushing loneliness when they log off. The digital delusion ecosystem is powerful because it works. It satisfies just enough to keep people hooked while starving them of the very thing they truly need. The link to broader decline. This is why loneliness rates are soaring despite constant connectivity. This is why people describe themselves as talking to people all day, but feeling more alone than ever. The ecosystem provides stimulation, but not depth. Attention, but not intimacy. Companionship, but not love. And it's reshaping human behavior in ways we can barely measure. People are losing the ability to navigate real relationships because they've grown accustomed to the simplicity of digital substitutes. The patience, empathy, and conflict resolution skills required for love are atrophying in the comfort of the ecosystem. This brings us to the next stage of decline. The independence ideology revolution. If digital illusions taught us we don't need people, independence ideology taught us we shouldn't need them. Stay with me, because in the next section, we'll explore how culture reframed vulnerability as weakness, interdependence as failure, and isolation as empowerment, and why that shift has made authentic connection nearly impossible. If the digital delusion ecosystem gave us substitutes for intimacy, the independence ideology revolution gave us a philosophy that glorifies living without it. Modern culture didn't just make relationships optional, it reframed dependence itself as a flaw, and independence as the highest form of strength. The autonomy worship system. At the heart of this revolution is what I call the autonomy worship system. From childhood, people are taught that success means self-reliance. The ideal is to stand alone, answer to no one, and compromise for nothing. Every advertisement, self-help book, and motivational slogan reinforces the same message: you don't need anyone but yourself. In the past, interdependence was celebrated. Communities thrived because people leaned on one another. Marriages worked because survival demanded mutual reliance. But now, autonomy has been rebranded as empowerment, while cooperation is painted as weakness. The vulnerability demonization process. This cultural shift also created what I call the vulnerability demonization process. Needing someone is no longer seen as human. It's seen as failure. Expressing loneliness gets labeled desperate. Asking for help is called clingy. Admitting fear of being alone is framed as a lack of maturity. Yet vulnerability is the foundation of intimacy. Without it, people can't connect deeply. But in a culture that demonizes dependence, people hide vulnerability behind masks of confidence and self-sufficiency. The result is shallow interactions that never develop into real relationships. The partnership pathologization trend. Healthy interdependence has also been pathologized. Couples who lean on each other emotionally are often accused of being codependent. Normal conflicts get labeled toxic. Ordinary expressions of need are flagged as red flags. This is the partnership pathologization trend, a cultural habit of labeling the natural struggles of relationships as evidence of dysfunction. By framing interdependence as pathology, society makes people afraid to commit at all. The isolation glorification effect. Alongside this is the isolation glorification effect. Being alone is portrayed as sophisticated, empowering, even superior. Popular culture praises the independent woman who needs no man and the lone wolf man who answers to no one. Movies and songs celebrate the narrative that solitude is strength, while partnership is a distraction or a burden. This makes people ashamed of their natural desire for companionship. Wanting love feels needy. Seeking connection feels weak. So people suppress these instincts until they become numb to them. The commitment phobia normalization. The final piece of this revolution is what I call the commitment phobia normalization. Inability to maintain long-term relationships is no longer seen as a personal struggle. It's reframed as wisdom. People say, I don't do commitment because I know better, or I avoid relationships because I'm too smart to get trapped. But what's presented as wisdom is often just fear. Fear of vulnerability, fear of compromise, fear of intimacy. Normalizing commitment avoidance only deepens the cultural divide, making lasting partnerships rarer and harder to sustain. Why the revolution took hold. The independence ideology revolution didn't appear out of nowhere. It was born from prosperity. When survival no longer required cooperation, autonomy became possible. Once autonomy was possible, culture elevated it into an ideal. It became fashionable to reject interdependence and pursue radical self-sufficiency. On the surface, this looks like progress, but beneath the surface, it's eroding the very traits that make connection possible: patience, sacrifice, empathy, and vulnerability. The hidden damage. This revolution explains why so much modern relationship advice focuses on leaving rather than repairing. When difficulty arises, people are told to walk away rather than work through it. Struggles aren't viewed as opportunities for growth, but as signs of incompatibility. The damage runs deeper than dating. It's reshaping entire generations. Children raised in households that glorify independence often struggle to form bonds later in life. Communities fracture when cooperation is no longer valued, and individuals suffer in silence, ashamed of their longing for intimacy. The bigger picture, the independence ideology revolution didn't just change dating culture, it changed the cultural definition of maturity itself. To be grown up now means to need no one. But in redefining strength as isolation, we've cut ourselves off from the very connections that make life meaningful. And here's the paradox. Human beings are biologically wired for interdependence. We evolved in tribes, families, and partnerships. We need each other not just for survival, but for psychological health. Loneliness devastates the brain. Isolation weakens the body. Autonomy, taken too far, isn't strength, it's starvation. This brings us to the next stage of decline, the biological mismatch crisis, because while culture celebrates independence, biology hasn't evolved to thrive in it. Our brains are wired for a world that no longer exists, and the result is a rising tide of depression, anxiety, and relationship dysfunction. Stay with me, because in the next section, we'll expose how prosperity created a mismatch between ancient psychology and modern conditions, and why this mismatch is tearing love apart at its roots. Humans are walking contradictions. We live in modern cities, but our brains are still wired for ancient tribes. We navigate dating apps, but our psychology evolved in villages where everyone knew each other. This is the root of what I call the biological mismatch crisis, the collision between our Stone Age wiring and our high-tech reality. The evolutionary lag effect. For millions of years, survival meant belonging to a tribe. Our brains evolved to seek bonds, build families, and cooperate under pressure. Attraction itself was designed to help us choose partners who could endure hardship, strength, fertility, resourcefulness. These traits mattered because they kept the tribe alive. But prosperity eliminated those survival challenges, while our brains remained the same. This is the evolutionary lag effect, the delay between environmental change and psychological adaptation. We now live in a world our brains were never designed to handle. The bonding system dysfunction. In the past, bonds formed through shared struggle. Couples survived famine, war, or hardship together. That shared suffering created deep intimacy. Today, survival is easy. Food is delivered. Threats are rare. Hardship is outsourced to institutions. This creates bonding system dysfunction. The mechanisms that once fused people together don't activate because the conditions that triggered them no longer exist. Without shared survival, bonds feel shallow. Relationships break apart because the glue of hardship is missing. The attraction algorithm confusion. Our mate selection instincts are also stuck in the past. Women are still subconsciously drawn to signs of strength and provision. Men are still drawn to signs of fertility and youth. But in modern environments, these traits no longer predict good partnership. A wealthy man may provide resources but lack emotional availability. A beautiful woman may attract attention but avoid long-term commitment. This creates attraction algorithm confusion. People choose partners using criteria designed for survival in harsh environments, only to find those partners ill-suited for stable relationships and modern comfort. The satisfaction impossibility syndrome. Another layer of mismatch is what I call the satisfaction impossibility syndrome. Our brains evolved to feel content once survival needs were met. Food, shelter, safety. Once secured, satisfaction followed. But in a world where these needs are permanently guaranteed, the brain never gets the reward signal. Security is taken for granted. The mind keeps searching for threats or new goals, leaving people restless and unsatisfied. This explains why people in prosperous nations often feel more anxious and depressed than those in poorer societies. Abundance doesn't soothe the brain. It confuses it. The brain was built to chase security, not to live permanently inside of it. The purpose vacuum problem. Perhaps the most devastating part of the mismatch is the purpose vacuum problem. For most of history, meaning was clear: survive, reproduce, contribute to the tribe. Modern life eliminated those primal goals. We don't need children to ensure survival. We don't need tribes to defend us. We don't even need family for economic security. Without survival-based meaning, people search endlessly for substitutes, careers, hobbies, identities. Some succeed. Many don't. The result is a silent epidemic of emptiness. People feel adrift, not because they lack resources, but because they lack purpose. Why the crisis matters for relationships. All of these mismatches collide in modern dating. People still crave connection because biology demands it, but the environment doesn't support it. They still seek partners using ancient criteria, but those criteria fail. They still long for purpose, but relationships no longer provide it by default. This is why relationships feel so fragile. The instincts that once glued couples together are outdated. The environment that once reinforced bonds has vanished. People are left trying to satisfy Stone Age psychology in a world of abundance, and it doesn't work. The emotional fallout. The fallout is everywhere. Loneliness despite constant connectivity, anxiety despite safety, dissatisfaction despite abundance. People walk through life with every survival need met, yet feel empty. Relationships, once central to survival, now struggle to justify themselves. Love feels optional, replaceable, even burdensome. This is the biological mismatch crisis, a hidden war between ancient wiring and modern life. And unless we recognize it, relationships will continue to fracture under the weight of prosperity. But the crisis doesn't stop here, because prosperity didn't just confuse our instincts, it also overloaded us with options. And those options, far from liberating us, created a new epidemic of paralysis. Stay with me, because in the next section, we'll explore the choice paralysis pandemic. How unlimited options don't lead to freedom, but to fear, indecision, and regret that suffocate modern relationships before they even begin. If the biological mismatch crisis left people restless and unsatisfied, prosperity added one more twist of the knife: too many options. This is the choice paralysis pandemic, a psychological condition where abundance doesn't liberate us, but traps us in endless indecision, regret, and dissatisfaction. The decision overwhelm effect. Imagine walking into a store with 2 jars of jam. Choosing is simple. Now imagine walking into a supermarket aisle with 50 different flavors, each boasting exotic ingredients and glowing reviews. Suddenly, the decision feels overwhelming. Whichever jar you pick, you'll wonder if one of the others might have been better. Dating in the modern world is exactly like that aisle. A century ago, your choices were limited to the people in your town or community. Today, with a swipe of your finger, you have access to thousands. Instead of making us happier, this triggers the decision overwhelm effect. Every choice feels like a risk, every commitment like a potential mistake. The optimization obsession syndrome. Choice doesn't just overwhelm, it breeds perfectionism. I call this the optimization obsession syndrome. People become so focused on finding the perfect partner that they lose the ability to appreciate good partners who aren't perfect. It's the endless search for someone taller, richer, funnier, smarter, kinder. The chase for a mythical partner who combines the best qualities of everyone you've ever met. But in chasing optimization, people overlook real opportunities for connection. They spend years looking for perfection and end up with nothing. The regret anticipation anxiety. Even when people do make a choice, they're haunted by what I call regret anticipation anxiety. It's the fear that tomorrow, next week, or next year, a better option will appear, and they'll regret choosing the partner they have. This anxiety keeps them from fully committing. They keep one foot out the door, scanning for alternatives, sabotaging the relationship they're in. The comparison trap dynamic. Social media pours fuel on the fire by creating the comparison trap dynamic. Couples compare their relationships not only to fantasy ideals, but also to the curated lives of others. Someone else's partner looks more successful. Someone else's marriage looks happier. The constant comparisons erode gratitude and amplify dissatisfaction. Even strong relationships feel fragile when measured against illusions. And when the mind is always scanning for better alternatives, commitment collapses. The potential addiction pattern. Another toxic side effect of unlimited choice is the potential addiction pattern. People become addicted to the thrill of new possibilities. The rush of a first date, the excitement of a new match, the dopamine hit of someone showing interest. But this addiction makes stability feel boring. Once the excitement fades, as it inevitably does in all relationships, people feel restless. Instead of building depth, they chase novelty. Potential becomes more intoxicating than reality. The cultural cost. The choice paralysis pandemic doesn't just harm individuals, it destabilizes societies. Marriage rates plummet as people delay commitment indefinitely. Families shrink as the window for childbearing closes. Communities fracture as relationships dissolve. Paradoxically, cultures with the most freedom of choice are often the least satisfied. Studies consistently show that arranged marriages or limited option environments produce higher reported satisfaction than modern choice-saturated societies. Why? Because limited choice forces commitment, and commitment builds satisfaction. Why more isn't next better? The paradox is brutal. More choice should bring more freedom, but instead it breeds anxiety, regret, and emptiness. Human psychology simply wasn't built for infinite options. We evolved to choose among a handful, not thousands. The brain misfires in abundance, leaving people stuck in indecision, always scanning, never settling. The link back to Lovesick's decline. This pandemic explains why so many modern singles feel burned out. They're not lazy or incapable of love. They're drowning in choices their biology can't process. Every swipe feels like opportunity, but in reality, it's paralysis disguised as possibility. And here's the cruel twist. While people hesitate, delay, and compare, they lose the very skills needed for intimacy. They stop practicing compromise, sacrifice, and patience, which leads us to the next stage of decline: the slow erosion of our ability to connect at all. Stay with me, because in the next section we'll explore the authentic connection erosion, how prosperity and abundance are not just reshaping love, but actually destroying the skills, emotions, and capacities that make intimacy possible in the first place. If the choice paralysis pandemic traps people in endless indecision, the next stage strips them of something even more vital: the very ability to bond. This is what I call the authentic connection erosion, the slow, systematic decay of the psychological skills and emotional capacities that once made deep intimacy possible. The intimacy skill atrophy. Relationships demand practice. They require negotiation, patience, vulnerability, and conflict resolution. In the past, these skills were non-negotiable. People had to cultivate them, or partnerships would collapse under the pressure of survival. But prosperity has made relationships optional, and with that shift came the intimacy skill atrophy. Why learn to navigate conflict when you can just walk away? Why develop patience when you can replace a partner with a swipe? Why practice empathy when your comfort doesn't depend on anyone else's cooperation? Like unused muscles, these skills wither in a culture that no longer requires them. The vulnerability tolerance degradation. Another layer of erosion is what I call the vulnerability tolerance degradation. True intimacy demands exposure, showing someone your fears, flaws, and weaknesses. But in a culture that glorifies independence and strength, vulnerability feels dangerous. People retreat into protective shells, showing only curated versions of themselves. The problem is simple. Without vulnerability, connection never goes beyond the surface. Relationships remain shallow, transactional, and fragile. And the more people avoid vulnerability, the less capable they become of handling it when it's required. The empathy capacity reduction. Interdependence once forced empathy. You had to understand your partner's needs, feelings, and perspectives because your survival depended on cooperation. But prosperity eliminated that necessity, leading to the empathy capacity reduction. People grow accustomed to prioritizing only themselves. Technology reinforces this by tailoring every experience to individual preferences. Customized playlists, personalized feeds, smart homes that respond only to your voice. Living in a world built around me makes it harder to comprehend we. The capacity to step outside oneself and truly feel for another person shrinks. The surface relationship addiction. With intimacy skills atrophied, vulnerability avoided, and empathy diminished, people fall into what I call the surface relationship addiction. These are connections that look good on paper, but lack depth. Casual dating, situationships, and online flirtations provide just enough stimulation to feel like connection without requiring the risk or effort of real intimacy. But surface-level bonds never satisfy. They create the illusion of connection while leaving people hungry for something deeper. Over time, this addiction makes depth feel foreign and even frightening. The emotional numbing defense. The final piece of this erosion is what I call the emotional numbing defense. Relationships involve risk, the risk of loss, betrayal, disappointment. To avoid that pain, many people unconsciously blunt their emotions. They feel less joy, less sadness, less love, less grief. This defense mechanism protects them from hurt, but also blocks them from the very feelings that make relationships meaningful. Emotional depth becomes not only rare, but uncomfortable. People begin to prefer safe emptiness over risky fullness. Why the erosion matters? This erosion explains why so many relationships today feel hollow even when they look successful. Couples may live together, share expenses, and even raise children, but without intimacy, empathy, and vulnerability, the bond feels empty. Success is measured in appearances, not depth. Worse, the erosion is self-reinforcing. The less people practice intimacy, the harder it becomes. The harder it becomes, the less they try. Over time, entire generations lose the psychological capacities their ancestors developed naturally through necessity. The cultural fallout. The fallout extends beyond dating. Workplaces become colder, friendships more fragile, families more fragmented. People who can't form authentic connections struggle with community, parenting, and even self-identity. Society becomes a network of individuals living side by side rather than interwoven lives supporting each other. The bigger picture, the authentic connection erosion is one of the most devastating consequences of prosperity because it's invisible. You can see falling marriage rates, you can measure declining birth rates, but you can't easily quantify the loss of vulnerability, empathy, or depth. Yet without these traits, relationships collapse before they begin. And this erosion collides with another destabilizing force, the gender expectation revolution. While intimacy skills are decaying, the rules of attraction and gender roles are shifting faster than ever, leaving men and women confused, frustrated, and disappointed. Stay with me, because in the next section, we'll uncover how changing expectations between the sexes and the chaos they create are further dismantling love in the modern world. If prosperity weakened the skills of intimacy, the gender expectation revolution shattered the rules of attraction. For thousands of years, men and women knew, or at least believed they knew, what the other expected. Roles were defined. The exchange was clear. But in the modern world, those rules dissolved without being replaced by anything stable. What's left is confusion, frustration, and disappointment on both sides. The role confusion chaos. For most of human history, gender roles were survival contracts. Men provided protection and resources. Women provided domestic management and childbearing. These weren't romantic ideals. They were practical arrangements. But as prosperity eliminated necessity, those roles lost their purpose. The result is what I call the role confusion chaos. Men no longer know what women expect from them. Women no longer know what men expect in return. The clear scripts of the past have been shredded, leaving both sexes improvising without a guide. Some men double down on traditional roles, only to be criticized as outdated. Others attempt modern sensitivity, only to be dismissed as weak. Women who embrace independence may be accused of being too masculine, while those who desire traditional dynamics may be accused of betraying feminism. Everyone is guessing, and no one feels satisfied. The value proposition, volatility. This uncertainty fuels the value proposition volatility. What makes a man attractive to women? What makes a woman attractive to men? The answers change constantly. One generation praises financial stability, the next demands emotional intelligence, the next wants physical appeal, and then it circles back again. For women, the volatility is just as brutal. Beauty, career success, independence, nurturing, sexual liberation, modesty. The standards pile up, shift, and conflict with one another. Meeting one expectation often violates another. No matter what someone offers, it never feels like enough. The compatibility criteria expansion. The revolution also produced the compatibility criteria expansion. In the past, a partner needed to provide survival essentials. Today, they're expected to provide everything: financial stability, emotional support, physical attraction, intellectual stimulation, humor, adventure, shared values, social status, and personal growth. It's not that people want too much. It's that they want everything at once. These ever-expanding criteria create impossible standards. No single human can embody them all. The mutual disappointment dynamic. When expectations become impossible, disappointment is inevitable. This is the mutual disappointment dynamic. Men feel they can't measure up to women's evolving demands. Women feel they can't meet men's shifting desires. Both sides feel perpetually let down. Instead of bonding over shared struggles, they clash over unmet expectations. The frustration breeds resentment, and the resentment feeds into the larger narrative that men and women are fundamentally incompatible. The attraction algorithm malfunction. Adding to the chaos is what I call the attraction algorithm malfunction. Human psychology evolved to find certain traits appealing: strength, fertility, dominance, youth. But in the modern world, those traits don't always correlate with good partnership. A man who's physically dominant may not be emotionally mature. A woman who's attractive may not want family life. The traits that trigger attraction often fail to align with modern values like stability, cooperation, and equality. The result? People are drawn to qualities that excite them short-term but fail them long-term. Why the revolution hurts so deeply? The gender expectation revolution isn't just confusing, it's destabilizing. It makes relationships feel like moving targets. The rules change mid-game. What was celebrated yesterday is criticized today. People feel punished for being themselves, yet also punished for trying to adapt. This chaos explains why dating advice feels so contradictory. One expert says, be traditional. Another says, be modern. One says, be vulnerable. Another says, never show weakness. The truth is that no single strategy works because the expectations themselves are fractured. The bigger picture. Beneath the chaos lies a deeper truth: men and women are not enemies. They're simply trapped in an environment that dismantled the roles their psychology was built to play, without creating new roles to replace them. Both sexes are trying to build partnerships on ground that keeps shifting under their feet. Where this leads, the gender expectation revolution has made love feel like a negotiation no one can win. But this doesn't mean relationships are doomed. It means they require new strategies. Strategies that consciously counteract the chaos. This brings us to the turning point. The intervention strategy framework. A blueprint for building meaningful connections in a world where prosperity, abundance, and shifting expectations threaten to tear them apart. Stay with me, because in the next section, we'll break down the practical steps from creating artificial necessity to practicing intentional vulnerability that can help modern relationships not only survive, but thrive. After 9 sections of decline, it would be easy to conclude that modern love is doomed. But that isn't the full story. Yes, prosperity has poisoned necessity. Yes, abundance has inflated desire. Yes, technology has distorted intimacy. But there is a way forward if we're willing to build it deliberately. I call this the intervention strategy framework. A conscious set of tools designed to counteract the cultural, psychological, and biological forces pulling relationships apart. It won't bring back the old world, but it can help us create new conditions where authentic love can survive in the modern one. The artificial necessity creation. First, couples must create what prosperity erased: shared struggle. I call this the artificial necessity creation. Since survival no longer forces cooperation, we must deliberately build cooperation into our lives. I will no line to build cooperation into our lives. Soprastuan and doer. Sinsinkinsipilns. That might mean starting a project together, building a business, traveling on a tight budget, or setting a shared fitness goal. Anything that requires teamwork, sacrifice, and reliance on each other reignites the bonding systems that prosperity silenced. When couples share a challenge, they rediscover what ancient humans knew instinctively: struggle is glue. The expectation-reality calibration. The next strategy is the expectation-reality calibration. Prosperity and abundance trick us into demanding fantasy partners. This strategy means consciously lowering the bar from perfection to humanity. It's not about settling. It's about aligning expectations with reality. Instead of asking, does this person meet every possible need? The better question is, can we build a life together that feels meaningful? By calibrating expectations, partners free themselves from the endless dissatisfaction of impossible standards. They stop chasing illusions and start appreciating reality. The intentional vulnerability practice. Third is what I call the intentional vulnerability practice. Modern culture demonizes neediness and glorifies independence. This strategy flips the script by deliberately practicing openness. That might mean sharing fears instead of hiding them, asking for help instead of powering through alone, or admitting weakness instead of pretending to be invincible. Vulnerability is uncomfortable, but it's the price of intimacy. Practicing it on purpose retrains the brain to accept dependence as strength, not weakness. The choice limitation strategy. The fourth intervention is the choice limitation strategy. Prosperity drowns us in options, creating paralysis. This strategy means consciously narrowing the field. Delete the dating apps after finding someone promising. Choose one partner instead of entertaining backups. Limit your exposure to comparison triggers on social media. By restricting choice, people create the conditions for commitment. Instead of endlessly scanning for better, they invest in good, and good, when nurtured, often becomes great. The digital detox protocol. The fifth strategy is the digital detox protocol. The digital delusion ecosystem hijacks intimacy by replacing it with simulations. To counter this, couples and individuals must carve out time away from screens. No phones at dinner, no scrolling in bed. Scheduled breaks from social media. Instead of seeking stimulation online, create it offline, through conversations, adventures, and shared experiences. A detox doesn't mean abandoning technology. It means reclaiming control of attention. So intimacy grows in the real world instead of being siphoned away by the virtual one. Why these strategies work? These strategies work because they recreate, artificially and intentionally, the conditions that prosperity erased. Survival once forced bonding, but now we must choose it. That choice requires effort, but it also creates meaning. Think of it like building a fire in a modern home. In the past, fire was survival. Today, we don't need it, but we still gather around it for warmth, light, and connection. Relationships in the modern world are the same. We don't need them to live, but we need them to feel alive. The bigger picture. The intervention strategy framework isn't about going backward. It's not about forcing traditional roles or pretending prosperity never happened. It's about adaptation, creating new rituals, new habits, and new mindsets that make love sustainable in an environment where it otherwise withers. And here's the truth. Couples who adopt these strategies will thrive where others collapse. They'll experience the bonding, intimacy, and satisfaction most people are losing. They'll stand out as rare examples of love that works in an age of abundance. Transition to the future. But what happens if society as a whole doesn't adopt these strategies? What if most people stay trapped in the cycles of independence, abundance, and digital distraction? That's where we must look ahead, to the future prediction matrix, because the trajectory of relationships isn't fixed. Multiple paths are possible. Some lead to collapse, others to adaptation. And the choices we make today will determine which future becomes real. Stay with me, because in the next section we'll explore the possible futures of love, from bifurcated societies to technological integration, and why some cultures may thrive while others quietly fade away. So far, we've dissected the hidden forces tearing relationships apart. But here's the question that matters most. Where does this lead? Are we watching the slow death of love? Or are we in the painful transition towards something new? The truth is, the future isn't fixed. What I call the future prediction matrix outlines several possible pathways forward. Each is shaped by how individuals, cultures, and societies respond to the pressures of prosperity. Some scenarios are bleak, others are hopeful, all of them are possible. The adaptation pathway analysis. The first possibility is the adaptation pathway analysis. Human beings are remarkably adaptable. Just as we adjusted to agriculture, industry, and technology, we may eventually adjust to prosperity's psychological distortions. Couples may normalize practices like digital detox, expectation, calibration, and vulnerability training. Communities may create cultural rituals that reinforce connection despite abundance. Over time, new norms could emerge that stabilize love in modern conditions. But adaptation is slow, and the costs during the transition, loneliness, depression, declining families, will be steep. The bifurcation scenario modeling. Another possibility is what I call the bifurcation scenario modeling. In this future, society splits into two groups with radically different strategies. One group embraces independence fully, living solo lifestyles supported by technology, substitutes, and virtual intimacy. Marriage, family, and long-term commitment become rare in this group. The other group consciously rebuilds interdependence. They adopt cultural, religious, or social frameworks that reinforce family, community, and shared struggle. These groups may look old-fashioned, but their stronger family structures give them demographic and cultural advantages. Over generations, they could outpace the independence-first cultures. The technology integration trajectory. Then there's the technology integration trajectory, a scenario where technology doesn't just destroy intimacy, but creates new forms of it. Artificial intelligence companions, virtual reality partnerships, and even bioenhancements could offer people the emotional satisfaction that real relationships struggle to provide. Some may reject these as shallow, others may embrace them as legitimate alternatives. Will digital partnerships ever replace human ones? Or for some, yes. But the risk is clear. If too many people choose simulations over reality, the skills for authentic connection may disappear altogether. Humanity could become emotionally functional with machines, but dysfunctional with each other. The cultural selection pressure. Another future possibility is what I call the cultural selection pressure. History shows that societies with stronger family systems often outperform those without them. Why? Because they reproduce more, stabilize faster, and transmit values across generations. If declining birth rates and fragile families continue, cultures that preserve functional relationships may gain population advantages. Over time, these cultures could dominate demographically, shifting global influence toward groups that prioritize connection. In this future, prosperity-driven independence becomes a self-limiting experiment, replaced by cultures that embrace interdependence. The crisis catalyst possibility. Finally, there is the crisis catalyst possibility. Prosperity eliminated necessity. But what happens if prosperity itself collapses? Economic recessions, political instability, or environmental disasters could restore survival-based dependence overnight. When survival is threatened, humans rediscover cooperation. Couples bond under pressure. Families unite for survival. Communities strengthen in crisis. It's possible that only through hardship will modern humans rediscover the intimacy prosperity erased. Which future is most likely? The future prediction matrix doesn't guarantee one outcome. Instead, it highlights the forces at play. Will we adapt consciously, split into cultural camps, integrate with technology, or be forced back into connection by crisis? The answer depends on the choices we make now. Why this matters personally? For individuals, this isn't just abstract theory. The future of love is shaped one choice at a time. When you choose to limit options, practice vulnerability, or disconnect from digital illusions, you're nudging the future toward adaptation rather than collapse. When communities reinforce interdependence, they're building resilience that prosperity alone can't provide. The future prediction matrix shows us that decline isn't destiny. The erosion of love is real, but it's also reversible. Humans created this environment, and humans can choose to change it. Transition to the final layer. But to fully understand the decline of relationships, we need to look at one more factor: economics. Because beneath the psychology, culture, and technology lies the biggest shift of all: the economic dependency reversal. This reversal flipped the financial foundations of partnership upside down, removing the last major incentive for cooperation. And without addressing it, no strategy for love can truly succeed. Stay with me, because in the next section, we'll expose how financial independence, once a dream of liberation, quietly dismantled the very partnerships it was supposed to empower. Prosperity didn't just shift psychology or culture. It rewrote the financial foundation of relationships. For thousands of years, men and women were economically dependent on each other. Marriage wasn't only about love. It was about survival through shared resources. But in the modern world, that equation has flipped. I call this the economic dependency reversal, the complete inversion of financial interdependence that once held partnerships together. The resource self-sufficiency transformation. In the past, most people couldn't survive financially on their own. A single income wasn't enough. Men needed wives to manage homes, raise children, and stretch resources. Women needed husbands to provide income and security. Marriage was an economic necessity as much as an emotional one. Today, both men and women have achieved resource self-sufficiency transformation. Women earn their own income, buy their own homes, and invest for retirement. Men hire services for tasks once handled by wives: cooking, cleaning, childcare. Both sexes can live comfortably alone. The financial glue of partnership dissolved. The provider role obsolescence. One of the sharpest effects is what I call the provider role obsolescence. For centuries, a man's attractiveness was linked to his ability to provide. Breadwinner status was not just admired, it was required. But women's economic advancement eliminated this need. A woman with her own income doesn't require a man's financial support and often earns as much or more. This shift left many men uncertain about their role. If financial provision is no longer valuable, what do they bring to the table? At the same time, women face new pressures. Their success, while liberating, sometimes fuels resentment or competition rather than partnership. The domestic service commercialization. Parallel to this change is the domestic service commercialization. Tasks traditionally performed by women within relationships, cooking, cleaning, childcare, social coordination, can now be purchased. Hops deliver dinner, cleaners maintain homes, daycares raise children. These services removed the practical incentives for marriage. Why marry for help when help can be outsourced? Marriage lost its utility and became a matter of preference. But preference alone is fragile. The lifestyle independence achievement. Prosperity also created what I call the lifestyle independence achievement. A single person today can maintain a lifestyle once only possible through combined incomes. Studio apartments, solo vacations, streaming entertainment, ride-sharing. These make it possible for individuals to enjoy comfort without a partner. This independence is empowering, but it weakens the motivation to compromise. Why sacrifice for someone else's needs when you can maintain your preferred lifestyle alone? The financial risk distribution. Another piece of the reversal is the financial risk distribution. In the past, marriage provided security against illness, old age, or poverty. Today, governments, insurance companies, and retirement funds supply that safety net. The risks once managed by marriage are now spread across institutions. This makes marriage feel less like a financial safety plan and more like a financial risk. Divorce courts, legal battles, and asset division often leave people worse off than if they had stayed single. For many, staying independent feels safer than combining resources. Why this reversal matters. The economic dependency reversal explains why traditional relationship advice often falls flat. Telling men to provide security or women to offer domestic value ignores the fact that both roles have been outsourced. What once created attraction now feels irrelevant. Worse, the reversal amplifies the prosperity paradox. If you can provide for yourself, if you can outsource domestic tasks, if you can insure against risk, then what's the tangible incentive to marry? Love becomes the only reason. But when love collides with inflated expectations and declining intimacy skills, it struggles to survive on its own. The hidden cost. The cost of this reversal isn't just declining marriage rates, it's the erosion of family formation itself. Fewer marriages lead to fewer children. Fewer children lead to shrinking populations. Over time, entire societies face demographic collapse, all because the economic necessity of partnership disappeared. The bigger picture. Independence is empowering, but it comes with unintended consequences. By removing the financial foundations of partnership, prosperity left relationships floating in midair, without the anchor of necessity. Love became a luxury, not a requirement. And luxuries are always the first to be abandoned when effort feels heavy. Transition to the next layer. But economics isn't the only hidden factor. Beneath the financial reversal lies another cultural collapse, the breakdown of community itself. Because even if couples found ways to bond, the wider social structures that once supported relationships have also fallen apart. Stay with me, because in the next section, we'll uncover the social fragmentation syndrome, how the disappearance of extended families, stable communities, and cultural accountability made modern relationships even more fragile. If economics dissolved the financial glue of relationships, community collapse destroyed the social scaffolding that once held couples together. For most of history, relationships weren't just private affairs. They were embedded in families, villages, churches, and tribes. These structures provided accountability, encouragement, and pressure. They made relationships stick. Today, those structures are gone. I call this the social fragmentation syndrome. The breakdown of communal systems that once guided, monitored, and reinforced long-term partnerships. The community accountability dissolution. In the past, communities acted as invisible referees. If a man abandoned his family, neighbors disapproved. If a couple quarreled, elders mediated. If young people delayed marriage too long, relatives nudged them forward. This is the community accountability dissolution, the disappearance of that social monitoring. In modern cities, anonymity reigns. People can cycle through relationships with no reputational consequences. Without community oversight, responsibility weakens. The extended family network collapse. Alongside this is the extended family network collapse. Grandparents, cousins, and uncles once formed a safety net. They introduced partners, gave advice, helped raise children, and modeled marriage. Today, geographic mobility scatters families. Divorce fractures ties, nuclear families shrink, leaving individuals adrift without guidance or support. The result? Couples must face every struggle alone. Without extended family scaffolding, their bonds strain under pressure. The peer group instability. Friend networks once acted as stabilizers too. Lifelong friends created shared accountability. If one partner misbehaved, the group corrected it. But prosperity created mobility. Carriers, relocations, and digital connections replaced stable, local peer groups. This peer group instability leaves people socially disconnected even when surrounded by acquaintances. The norm enforcement vacuum. Communities once enforced norms that supported marriage and family, but now we live in what I call a norm enforcement vacuum. Without consistent cultural expectations, people define relationships however they wish. That sounds liberating, but it creates instability. Without shared norms, misunderstandings multiply and conflicts escalate. The role model scarcity. Finally, there's the role model scarcity. Previous generations could point to grandparents married for 50 years as proof that lasting love was possible. Today, divorce and fragmentation make such examples rare. Without models, young people stumble in the dark, trying to build relationships without a blueprint. Why this matters? The social fragmentation syndrome reveals why personal skills alone aren't enough. Even the best communicators, the most empathetic lovers, and the most dedicated partners struggle when the social ecosystem that supports them collapses. Love doesn't just happen between two people. It's reinforced by the community around them. And with community gone, another cultural force fills the vacuum. The obsession with pleasure, novelty, and optimization. Prosperity didn't just fragment communities. It created a new value system. I call it the hedonistic optimization culture, a worldview that prioritizes immediate pleasure, constant novelty, and personal fulfillment over long-term stability and sacrifice. The instant gratification infrastructure. Technology created the instant gratification infrastructure. Everything is on demand: food, entertainment, attention, even sex. Relationships, which require patience and effort, feel slow by comparison. Why wait for intimacy when a screen can provide stimulation instantly? The experience collection mentality. The experience collection mentality. This infrastructure fuels the experience collection mentality. Instead of seeking one deep relationship, many pursue variety, new partners, new adventures, new stories to tell. Love becomes entertainment, not commitment. Partners become chapters in a personal highlight reel. The effort avoidance imperative. This leads to the effort avoidance imperative. Any activity requiring sustained attention, emotional labor, compromise, sacrifice, feels unbearable compared to the easy alternatives prosperity provides. Relationships demand effort. Hedonism teaches us to avoid it. The commitment phobia rationalization. This culture also normalizes what I call the commitment phobia rationalization. People don't admit fear of intimacy. Instead, they reframe it as wisdom. I just know what I want. I refuse to waste time on the wrong person. What sounds like confidence often masks an inability to sustain bonds. The self-actualization ideology. Finally, there's the self-actualization ideology. The belief that personal development is more important than family or partnership. Fulfillment is sought through careers, hobbies, or solo growth. Relationships are seen as distractions rather than foundations. Why this culture is dangerous? The hedonistic optimization culture convinces people that abandoning relationships is progress, but in reality, it erodes the very structure societies depend on. Families shrink, communities weaken, civilizations lose stability. This leads us to the inevitable conclusion. Modern relationships aren't failing because men and women are broken. They're failing because prosperity, abundance, and cultural shifts created an environment hostile to connection. We've covered the necessity extinction event, the prosperity paradox matrix, the desire escalation trap, the digital delusion ecosystem, the independence ideology revolution, the biological mismatch crisis, the choice paralysis pandemic, the authentic connection erosion, the gender expectation revolution, the economic dependency reversal, the social fragmentation syndrome, and the hedonistic optimization culture. Each is a piece of the same puzzle. Prosperity has made relationships unnecessary, and in doing so has made them nearly impossible. But here's the final truth. None of this is destiny. These are conditions, not sentences. They describe the environment, not the outcome. We stand at a crossroads. One path is passive acceptance, embracing isolation, outsourcing intimacy to technology, and allowing families to dissolve. The other path is conscious resistance, deliberately building new strategies, rituals, and frameworks that restore connection in a world that erased it. That resistance won't look like the past. It won't mean returning to rigid gender roles or survival-based marriages. Instead, it means inventing new ways to bond through artificial necessity, expectation calibration, intentional vulnerability, limited choice, and digital detox. It means communities must rebuild accountability. It means individuals must value long-term sacrifice as much as short-term pleasure. The choice is deeply personal. Every swipe, every breakup, every moment of vulnerability or withdrawal nudges the future one way or the other. Love's survival depends on whether enough people choose connection over comfort, commitment over convenience, and reality over illusion. Because at the end of the day, humans don't just want comfort, we want meaning, and meaning has always been found in bonds, not in isolation. So here's the question: will we accept the loneliness of prosperity, or will we rise to the challenge of building love that thrives despite it? The answer isn't written in history. It's written in the choices we make. Today, tonight, right now.